Tape Deck Media.
My friend Dan, he's got a podcast, cause all comics need a podcast, and nobody had a podcast called The Art of Bombing. So Dan went out and bought a tape deck. Who knows why he bought a tape deck? Podcasts don't get played on tape decks, but Dan is from the 80s. So hey there, all you funny jerks, come talk to Dan about your work. Tell him all about your worst times. It's The Art of Bombing.
We're back. Welcome to an all-new Art of Bombing presents Between Bombs Callbacks, where Josh and I, your host, Dan Bulich Jr., call back the most recent episode. This week, we are calling back episode 297 with James Stanley. And as you can tell, I'm very peppy, and I have my voice back. I don't sound like I'm dying.
You don't. You were a mummified version of yourself last time.
I was.
Like dust was coming out of his mouth, you guys.
Pretty much.
And I thought he was going to be the first podcast host to die in the middle of recording the podcast.
And then you would have had the podcast. It would have been like Highlander, only one.
All of this could have been mine.
All of this work for no money could be yours.
Yes. My dreams to fulfill,
coming true.
My destiny.
Before we started recording, you were talking about AI tools, and I was like, "Are you sure you want us to use them? It could replace both of us."
Yeah, I know. Well, this could be AI right now. I think it's smart enough now. When it has enough like body of work on these shows to like do both of us, but just better.
Like just our better voices, versions of us.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh man, you guys had Louis C.K. on the show. Amazing. Like they do his voice too. Like
we just use AI to generate fake episodes.
Yeah, there you go.
I mean,
how do we know that's not already happening?
I mean, it could very well be. You know, it's funny. So my day job, I'm a marketing specialist for a plumbing heating company. And really, I'm more of like the marketing coordinator. Like I do all the marketing or whatever. And
you don't have the top marketing spot at that company. Jeez.
Well, I do because I'm the only marketing person at the company. But that's why I said I should probably have a different title. But we've been. But
you demoted yourself in the middle of like saying what you did. Yeah, so I thought somebody else was like putting you in your place.
I'm the only person there that does the marketing, but. It's funny because we were working on we're probably going to be doing some radio ads, and I've been working with the sales guy at the radio, and they sent us a few samples, like some spec ads, and I like replied back. I was like, "Hey, I'm sure this isn't the case, but did you use AI to generate these? Because that voice sounds like a robot." And it was just like one of their voice people being serious.
Oh no.
And I was like, I didn't think so, but he sounds like a robot. That's all I'm saying. And even he agreed. He was like, yeah, I totally see what you're saying there because of the way they pronounced the name of the company. It sounded so robotic. I was like, did you guys just generate this with AI?
Yeah, and he's like, I get that all the time, man. I get that all the time. People funny. Mistake me for a robot.
Yeah, I'm sure. Just going along, doing the things. I don't know about you. I'm having a good way. If you're listening, you can probably tell, or watching, you can tell I'm in a good mood. Obviously, I feel better. Found out I had the influenza B last week. That's why my voice wasn't working, but it was weird because the only symptom I had is I had a little bit of a cough and I couldn't talk. All the other symptoms did not have. But this week, I'm feeling better. I've had some kick-ass shows. I had a corporate that I did last night that went so well. They gave me a nice tip, and they hired me for another event next week. So I got a second corporate out of it. They gave me a 5-star review and a great review on Gig Salad where they hired me originally. So yeah, going good. And
You're
part of
welcome,
that, though,
sunshine.
the reason I got such a good review, though, you want to know what the secret is? Sometimes you have to
Yes.
give them what you want, and that's what we're talking about today. One of the things we want to talk about is
Yeah.
either being tough or playing to your crowd.
Great interview with James Stanley, I thought, but people probably haven't heard it. We got to get.
They
Not
might
only
not
do
have.
we have to give them time to listen
We
to
do.
that, but we didn't give the break last time, so maybe they
didn't.
have to catch up on a couple episodes.
We dropped the bomb. The bomb. Yeah, we dropped the bomb last week. The ball bomb, whatever. All right.
We drop
This
a
is your
bomb every
chance.
time we.
We do. All right. Go listen to last week's episode with James Stanley. So then you'll know what we're talking about. Okay. Now you're caught up.
That's it. All right, James Stanley. Yeah. So you were saying that there's sort of two opposing forces at work that I heard. Like James, his stance that he had in the episode sounded like, "Hey, I just go and I do me. Like I don't worry about what the crowd wants. I don't focus on that at all. I just go out there and do what I want to do." What do you think about that?
So, I mean, I think I would agree that you should have your artist integrity, but I think there has to be a balance because at the end of the day, and you see this with comics who become, where they just like all they do is grind and all they know is comedy, and then all their jokes kind of become inside baseball, and essentially they start playing to the back of the room. They're not going to get bookings because the crowd doesn't want that. You have to be relatable to your crowd at some point. So, if people are going to come, or less until you build your own audience. Obviously, if you build your own audience, you can do whatever you want. But until you get that audience, until you find that audience and you have that support, you do have to play a little bit to the crowd. You have to give them a little bit of what they want because they're paying for that show. And if it's just like any product, you work in sales, consulting and coaching. I do marketing. So it's very similar. Sales and marketing are very similar. And, you have to provide for a customer. And if you're not delivering a product that the customer's happy with, they're going to give a bad review. Now, with art, obviously, you got to think about that, having some integrity, but I think it's a balance. You can still have your integrity and be an artist and still deliver a product that audiences want.
Yeah. And you just said you got rebooked after a gig that you just did, and they're going to bring you back. So was that the result of you playing to the crowd or sticking to your guns? Like,
no,
how
I
did
mean,
that happen?
I played a little bit to the crowd in the sense where I did some crowd work because it was a small group for one. There was only like 16 people, and it was a company's retreat. They were, they were doing like a leadership retreat or so, essentially. And so there was only like 15, 16 people. It was very informal. It was like in the living room of a lodge that they rented. And so, I did my material, most of what I would, do or whatever, but I also played to the crowd in the sense where I did a little bit of crowd work. I kind of poked fun at some of the people. I made it very conversational because it was such a small room and they weren't really I mean, they did kind of have they were allowed to have cocktails or whatever, and they had just kind of got the cocktails. So it's not like they had time to have a few. They just got out of their day-long meetings and then they quick grabbed a cocktail and then came back for the comedy show. But I played around with the crowd. I goofed around with some of the employees that made them laugh. And so I did that. And then I went in and out. So I was kind of going in and out of my material, but I also delivered material that I knew, wasn't necessarily planned because I don't do this material much anymore. But I was like, oh, just based on my small interactions as I was setting up with this crowd, they're going to be more into this other material than a corporate clean set. I still work clean, but I didn't do like the stuff that I would normally do for a corporate gig. Just, it was a little more not dirty, but leaning more towards edgy, like
Yeah,
I
but
talked,
you went
and it
into it
was
organically because
organic. Yeah.
like because you had some interaction with them and you said, "Oh,
Hmm.
here's another few minutes of material
Yep.
that can work here." And it like what I'm getting from James is like, F everybody. I'm just going to do what I want. And I don't
Hmm.
know, maybe that's how he comes off, but I don't know that he really does that. I mean, he's, you know, he
I think
understands and
in
talks about the business
the
side as well.
particular, I was going to say, I think in the particular story from his bombing story, I think that was how he chose to go.
Yeah,
I don't think that's how. I don't necessarily think that's his mindset all the time. I think it was
right.
just that particular show because, and shows similar to that, because
Yeah,
the people were kind of being rowdy and they were kind of being jerks. So it's like, well, if you're going to be jerks, I'm just going to do whatever, piss
yeah,
off. Really.
right.
And I see that. I kind of see that and understand that when you have crowds that are being rude and being intrusive and interruptive, where you just want to be like, you know what? I've decided you're being a bad crowd, so I'm not going to give you what you want now.
And
Almost like
yeah, and there, and to sort of come to his defense a little bit too, right? Like art has to somewhat be for the artist.
Hmm.
Otherwise, you just make generic art that
Yep.
everyone likes, and it's just kind of soulless and it's not individual.
Yep.
So there has to be some element of everybody, and I need to do stuff that I like to do, and but I think the way that you described what you did the other night was the perfect mixture of that. Like you did things that you like doing, you did them in a way that only you could do, but you
Hmm.
did the things that you thought might lend to the best to that crowd. It made the organizers happy and they want you back. And I think that's the
Yeah. Yeah.
cycle that people want to play in.
And I think part of it was that I made it engaging, and that was even in the review that they left. They left me a 5-star
Okay.
review, and even in the review, they mentioned that that it was a small crowd of 16 people, and sometimes that can be hard to perform for. And they made it a point to say I did a really good job with engaging that small crowd. And that was the key. I engaged with them, not just by doing material, because I didn't have an opener either. That's the other thing with like corporate gigs. You don't have an opener. I didn't have anybody even introduce me. They were just like, okay, everybody's gathered up. We're ready to do the show. And I just have to go out and start the show. And so I was just like, well, it's a small crowd. It would be weird to
Sure.
just go do an act like you were at a comedy club. It's
Right.
like we're in
Yeah,
a
that'd be
living
tone
room
deaf.
essentially.
Yeah, you can't be tone deaf to the situation, and I'm sure James isn't tone deaf. It
Yeah.
he how many times though have we had a guest on the show and you asked bombing story and they start with, "Well, I was in a small town and I told this political joke." Like it's like the recipe for destruction. I'm like, here we go.
It really is,
Yeah,
especially in the Midwest.
right,
Especially in
right.
the Midwest.
And so here's the thing about political humor, though. Like James was saying, like I listened carefully to his story, and he's saying, like, I wasn't saying something that was meant to be in your face of the audience. I was
Mhm.
actually saying something I thought they'd be politically aligned with. And it turned out that just because I went to a political place in the
They
act
checked
early
out.
on, like
Yeah.
they completely checked out from there and didn't want to hear it. And
Mhm.
I've found
Well,
that too, where I've been in small towns and I've done I'm not like I don't tell like a lot of racial jokes, but I have some stuff there that can kind of skirt the edge of that, and it's meant to be done in a way that's racism is not good, and I think it's something that
mhm.
most people would agree with. But because I'm just in that area, they kind of back off and get quiet.
Yeah. Well, I think part of that is just the political landscape. One thing that I've seen over,
Yeah,
and a lot of this changed in 2016 with when Trump was running for president and became president. A lot of the political landscape kind of changed. And what I mean by that is that I've seen people just like not even do a joke, just mention Trump and a crowd got freaked out and immediately shut down and started heckling, and they hadn't even done a joke. They just,
Right.
it
Just
triggered them.
mentioned it.
People are becoming triggered just by mentioning politics. And I think when you're dealing with that, doing political humor, you have to have balance. You can't, and you'll even see this with a lot of like TV shows now. A lot of the late night shows kind of are left leaning, and they're not really balanced with, they're not really making fun of all sides. They're making fun of the right. Or you'll have, like, now there's late night shows on Fox to combat it where they're making fun of people on the left, but there's no like down the middle. Like back in the
Right.
day, like when Jay Leno was on there, he made fun of both sides. He didn't really have his
Right.
own opinion per se. He just kind of made fun of both aisles. Same with another, good examples of this are like Christopher Titus is a good example of this. He's a very political comedian. Pretty sure he seems like he's pretty left leaning, pretty liberal. But when he does his comedy, he makes fun of everybody. He's like goes after both sides. Like he's pretty down the middle when it comes to
Yeah.
doing his political humor. And I think that's part like finding balance. But I think because of social media, and just the way politics have been, and it's such a clown show in Washington D.C. right now, and it's just always in your face.
Right.
You everywhere you look, there's some stupid thing with politics going on. I think people are just getting sick of hearing politics. I mean, the
Yeah.
point of coming to a comedy show is to forget about life for an hour and a half. And when you have all these things being shoved down your face every minute of your life, you don't want to hear more about it at a comedy show. So I
Yeah.
don't think it's like a left leaning, right leaning, liberal leaning, whatever. It's just people are tired of hearing politics. They don't want anything to do with it.
Right. Right. Yeah. People become incensed just at the idea that you're going to even get close to it. And I think
It's
once they
created a
see that
divide.
you're on the outskirts of something potentially really toxic, and so it makes people uncomfortable even when you get close to it. So
Mm-hmm.
I would be afraid to even touch it, and so I don't know how comics like Christopher Titus even go there. Maybe it's already been established and that's what people expect.
Yeah. And I
But
think you make a good point there with somebody like Christopher Titus. He's always been known as kind of a political comedian. Same with Lewis Black. Like,
yeah,
he's always been
yeah,
angry, making fun of politics or whatever. So like they both have their own fan bases. So people going to those shows,
they're
like,
gonna,
because
yeah, they'll be
because
all
they
right.
perform in theaters, they're not just randomly going to a comedy show at a comedy club. They're going
Right.
they're going out of their way to see a comedian that they enjoy. So they have that
Yeah,
fan base. So I think that definitely helps. But
yeah,
yeah, I think it's a fine line and it's a slippery slope. But I think a lot of it, like I said, is just politics has just been so pushed in our faces lately that people just
yeah,
they don't want to hear about it. They don't
right,
care. They just want to come laugh. And if you're going to do political humor, you have to do it in a way where, like I said, it's a fine balancing act. You have to do it in a way where you're not segregating one group of people. It's the same thing with, you see all this controversy with comedians like Dave Chappelle and, doing a lot of the material that he's been doing with, towards transgendered people. He is disenfranchising that group of people. He's punching down on that group of people. Well, it's the same thing with politics. Like if you're a left-leaning comedian and you start punching down on right-leaning people, you can think you have moral ground all you want, whatever. I'm not being political here. My point is you're still punching down on a group of people, and if there are members of that group of people in your audience, you're going to cause them not to enjoy you.
yeah. And people can easily miss out on your intent. Like
Mm-hmm.
when, if you stand up on stage with a microphone, if that's part of your job in any capacity, you're going to piss people off. There's
Mm-hmm.
no way around it. Like no
Oh,
matter how
absolutely.
well-meaning, family-oriented, clean you are, like
I'm one of
they
the
don't
least
know you.
offensive comedians and one of the safest comedians, and I still have had people complain about things that
Yep.
I upset them because of something I said, and I'm like, what?
Yep. Yeah. The last show I did in a really small town went great. It went really well. And when I look back on it, it's because I think I stuck to a lot of the things that were just about
Mm-hmm.
me, that were
Yep.
related. And I think that's so. If you're in a small town, you're on the road, you're not sure, maybe you're playing that kind of environment for the first time, or you haven't had success with it yet. I think, the best thing to do is to stick to you and make your
Mm-hmm.
stuff about you. And then that starts to pick up. Maybe they start to like you, and you can start venturing into other areas and taking more risks.
Oh, absolutely. And I would also add to that just because you're in a small town, don't judge what their politics may or may not be, because that's one thing
Right.
I see a lot of too, where that can influence how you deliver your material. I've seen comedians assume a town was, more right leaning or more Republican or conservative, and they present their material with a different tone, and it turns out that it's a very liberal small town, and because of their tone, even though they're making fun of the other side, their tone doesn't, their material isn't delivered very well, and it's
Right.
still not funny to this crowd that normally it could be funny to them, because
Right.
and I think part of that comes from because they made the assumption, they assumed that all of them out there in the crowd were, conservative, and now they're offended because, oh, you just judged us, we're the opposite of that, and now they
Yeah.
don't want to come along for, your show. So
Yeah.
don't judge a town by its, just because it's a
Right. How
small
many
town.
buildings have lights on? Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Maybe do your research, That's one
Yeah.
thing, as a
Yeah. They like
comedian,
that.
how much recon are you doing before your show? One thing I like to do, and I don't necessarily, it's not like I go and interview people, but one thing I like to do when I go to a show, if I try to get there somewhat early so that I can go to a coffee shop or go to a restaurant or go to some of the stores downtown or whatever it is and people watch. I'm minding my own business, but I'm also kind of observing the people around me, because that'll give you a feel for the kind of people in said community, especially in a small town, because they're all, usually in a small town, there's like one coffee shop, and it's also the gas station and the restaurant and everything. You know what I mean? Like,
And in the
that's the
place where you're
one.
performing. Yeah.
Exactly. It's all
I,
of
I
those
literally
things.
drove. I drove to a gig in a small town, and I got there, and like I hadn't bothered to like look at the address yet. I just like had my phone direct me to the town because I was like, this place has 200 people in it. Like, how hard is it going to be to find the place where I'm going to perform? So I get there at night. Shows at like 8. I roll in at 7. It's dark. Small farm town. There's one building with the lights on with all the cars out front. Didn't look
You're
at the
like, that's
thing.
got to be
Drove up
it.
to it. Opened the door. Comedy show. Like, works.
Yep, exactly.
Everybody was there.
Yeah. So that would be my advice. Do a little recon and don't judge the town just because it's small. And like I said, going back to that, if you're going to do political humor, just make sure you're doing it in a balanced way. I think that's the key. But honestly, don't do political humor. That's how I feel about it now. I feel like
Yeah.
it's just because of it being so much in people's faces, they just don't want to hear they don't want to hear about politics,
Yeah, it's kind of a tough,
regardless.
toxic time for that. Maybe
It
get
really
known
is.
first. Once you build your audience, start breaking the rules.
Yep, yep. Once you have your own audience, you can pretty much do whatever you want. So, well, I think that's going to do it for this episode of Between Bombs Callbacks. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you have an opinion about political humor and you disagree with everything we said, you can do that, and we'd love to hear about it. You can send that to the Art of Bombing pod@gmail.com, or you can go over to Facebook. It is in the show notes. You can go over to Facebook group, the Art of Bombing Bomb Squad Facebook group, and leave a comment in there and tell us that we're wrong. We'll take it. and then we'll respond by saying thank you for your feedback. And you do you. But again, thank you so much for listening. Make sure if you're new to this podcast, or maybe you've been listening forever, tell your friends about it. Tell your comedian buddies about the art of bombing. This podcast, the whole point of this is that we can all get better together by learning from our mistakes, the mistakes of the people that are on the podcast, Josh and I's mistakes, so we can get better. So tell your friends about it. Help us grow the show. We definitely appreciate that. Again, if you haven't already, subscribe to the podcast, like, share the content, do the things. We love you, and we will be back next week with an all new episode. Until then, have a great week.
This has been a Tape Deck Media production. Thank you for listening.